Let's not meet. Left my bathroom to investigate. Saw a man crawling through my window. This literally happened an hour ago and I'm still shaken up about it. Mostly because I don't know why it happened. Around 2 or so I texted my friend asking her when I should come swing by her place since we'd planned to spend tonight together. She told me to come by 6, so I decided to spend the next few hours doing self-care stuff. I slapped a face mask on, threw on some YouTube and started to relax for a bit when our intercom starts ringing, meaning someone is asking to be buzzed in. Our apartment building is set up pretty weird, as in it's divided into 2 separate buildings but only our building is accessible from the main street. Also, the other buildings' apartments share our building's apartments numbers with a single letter being the only difference. This means that more often than not, food shows up at our place that's meant for the lovely couple just across the alley. So when this buzzing starts, I obviously assume it's just food for them. And I don't feel like opening my door once this guy comes all the way upstairs to explain that he needs to go back down and out to the other building while I'm in a face mask and my underwear. So I don't answer the buzzer. It keeps buzzing for about 2 minutes. About 10 minutes later, I'm in the bathroom and washing my face when I hear a bunch of weird noises coming from the fire escape. Our apartment is super small, so literally you could see the bathroom doorway and probably slightly into the bathroom from this window. I walk out of the bathroom, face sopping wet, and see some dude with a backpack on hunched over with 1 foot on my now open windowsill. It's late November. I live up north. It is way too ducking cold for me to ever have that window open. I'm about to shout what the F when this guy makes eye contact and immediately scrambles back down the fire escape. I'm super in shock at this point and can't believe I just saw what I did, and I'm honestly too afraid to immediately run to the window because I don't want him to realize I'm home alone and come back, regardless of intentions. After I hear the door that leads from the alleyway into the main building slam, I quickly run to both windows in our house that led to the fire escape and lock them. I'm still very WTF over this whole situation. My boyfriend ran home immediately after because I called him. We both have no ducking idea what the dude could have wanted. Strangled on my way home from school. When I started 7th grade, I started hanging out with the meanest kids in the school. All my childhood friends changed when we entered middle school. Cliques began to form, and suddenly the kids I knew since kindergarten didn't want to be my friend anymore. So I took up with the bad kids. There was a whole clan of them, and half of them were family. The ones who were related all lived in what we called a holler, though I now call it the rattlesnake den or if I drive past it. Holler folk are not to be trusted, and if you're from a small rural area, you know what I'm talking about. These kids were ranging in age from 9th 12th grade. They were always in trouble, getting suspended, getting detention, defying authority, and they just looked like a bunch of punks. I had always been a good kid, but a lot of things changed in this era for me. My mom married a human-shaped leech around the same time, who was both verbally and emotionally abusive to me. My brother and sister were estranged by that point because of said leech. My mom didn't ever seem to have time for me and my problems anymore. She was always a single parent up until this point in my life, but honestly not a good one. So taking up with a bunch of angry kids made me feel better, and soon, I started doing really bad things too. One of the holler kids in this family was my age, and she and I became best frenemies. So to escape my reality, I tried to spend as much time at her house as I possibly could. I hated it. Those people lived like animals, but it was better than going home. As a side note, there are other terrifying experiences from this same time period, like the time her grandmother held me hostage for 3 days when I was about 13. But I digress. Her older cousins, specifically the one we all called P-Bob, would often bounce around the holler from house to house, probably out of boredom. P-Bob was about 17 or maybe even 18 at the time, and it seemed that once he found out I was spending a lot of time at her house, he came around more and more. I can recall one specific time when I first realized I was afraid of this guy. Frenemy and I were camping in the yard. Our camping trip basically consisted of us setting up an old, worn-out tent off to the side of their Dust Bowl property, taking a radio and some off-brand pop, and staying in the tent until it got too cold at around 3 or 4 am. Pretty such that beach left me out there by myself that night, but that's neither here nor there. Probably at around 10 or 11 that night, P-Bob and another cousin snuck up on our tent and scared us. P-Bob was a big boy. He was fat, but he also lifted weights. I remember he had a head like a bull, and he always had the most condescending look on his face. Some of the other boys, all of which were older, were actually really nice and I really considered them my friends. Spoiler, they weren't really my friend, but we'll get there. P-Bob however was always aloof. He was never not a smartass unless he was raging about something. Sometimes when I'd be at my friend's house, I could hear him in his mom's house next door screaming his guts out at her. He had a little sister, who he was unabashedly abusive of. I even once saw him slap her, no holds barred, full on hard slap. She was probably 8 or 9, maybe younger. He was also sexually abusive of her, but that's not my story to tell. I remember being afraid to get out of the tent that night while P-Bob was there. Like that old thing was really going to protect me in any way. He was being sexually derogative, if there's a such thing. He was badgering me but doing it in a way that made it come across as just him being comedic. He said something to me about going to another one of the cousins' house and having sex with me on a kitchen counter, though his version of this statement was far more colorful and terrifying. I had no idea how to react, so I caught an attitude with him and started trying to berate him right back, even going so far as to threaten him. I was completely full of shit, but I was an angry child and had no idea how else to handle the situation. To skip ahead, there were dozens of other awful encounters with him over the next year or so. He grabbed me one day at school and tried to throw me down a flight of concrete stairs, all the while trying to sneak a feel of various parts of my body. When I said something about it to Freemummy, she belittled me and told me I was ducking retarded, and that he was only being funny. She was a very cruel and hateful person. They all were, really. By 8th grade, these friends had really changed me as a person, and not for the better. Through me, P-Bob was introduced to a girl whom I frequently argued and spatted with named Lorelei. She was a Koki transfer from the hood in Ohio, and she and I hated each other immediately, so we fought often but never physical. Long story short, she met P-Bob because of one of our arguments, and the two of them started dating. Toward the end of the school year, they broke up. I was oblivious to this, as the only conversations I ever had with this girl were limited to giving her shit and her giving it right back, until one day, she made a comment about me causing her and P-Bob to break up. I most certainly had nothing to do with that, but I felt she was an imbecile so I laughed it off. The end of the school day came, and we all loaded on the bus. By this point, I had made a new friend whom was also friends with the Bad Holler kids, Tasha, and she was coming to my house for the weekend. We sat down near the back of the bus and waited to leave. I noticed when P-Bob got on the bus, he immediately locked his eyes on me and commenced to giving me the dirtiest look I've ever seen. If looks could kill, right? He sat down in the seat behind me and Tasha. The bus finally took off, and we made it out Route 7 and almost to Doctors Branch Road, so about 3 to 5 miles, before he really started badgering me. I don't remember everything he said, but for many years I did. In fact, for years following this event, I'd hear his words on a loop and experience the attack over and over in my mind. It took a long time to stop thinking about it, so honestly, I'm glad I don't remember it all anymore. But, he was saying a lot of horrific stuff. I mean, awful stuff to me. Sick stuff. Threats. I was terrified, but I was more so humiliated. He also said something about me breaking him and Lorelei up, and that I called him a player. I had never heard that word before that day. All my bad kid friends were laughing at me. Tasha was too. This is one of the few times in my life where I truly lost my ability to speak. So I sat there without saying a word, and just occasionally glanced at him to gauge the emotion on his face. He had now switched seats and was across from us. We were about another 6 miles from my drop off when he leaned over to Tasha and told her to move back to another seat, which she did without hesitation, and he jumped in the seat with me. He continued attacking me, so I put my face against the bus window and tried to scoot as far into the corner as I could. I guess my refusal to pay attention to him could be what escalated the situation. But the next thing I know, he's got my head in a vice grip with his arms and he's simultaneously strangling me and crushing my face. Keep in mind, I was an 8th grader. This guy was supposed to have graduated like a year or 2 prior. So legally, he was an adult. The school bus driver did nothing to stop P-Bob, to which he would later defend by saying that us kids on the back were always doing that kind of stuff and he didn't think it was anything out of the ordinary. I hesitate to even tell you that my bus driver was also the father of 2 of the Holler Kid boys, and the freaking sheriff of our town. So there I am, unable to breathe or scream, but still trying. I slapped, punched, clawed, but he kept squeezing my head. It felt as if my cheekbones were collapsing. I don't remember how long this went on, because things got blurry after this. Even it was still fresh in my mind. Days later, I do remember he eventually let go of me and then hit me a few times and then tried to strangle me again. And I remember at some point seeing everyone, my friends, laughing at me. But like I said, it's blurry. The next thing I remember was standing by the front seats of the bus waiting for it to come to a complete stop and trying with everything in me to hold back tears. When I got off the bus, I ran straight into the house and to the bathroom to hide. I didn't want my mom to see me and I needed a moment to gather myself. But the tears were pouring by then and I could make them stop. My face looked bad, but it got worse over the next few days, as bruises tend to get darker as they heal. When I didn't come out of the bathroom for a while, my mom came to the door and asked what I was doing. Tasha, who was standing outside the door, I believe in an attempt to draw my mom's attention and force me to tell, started crying and spilled the beans. Yeah, I'm rolling my eyes on this one. Still to this day, my mom forced me to come out of the bathroom. My screaming ninny stepdad got involved. The police were called, and I had to pose for what felt like an eternity of police evidence photos. My face looked like it had been put in the washing machine with a bunch of sneakers. My throat was bruised. I was scratched up a little. It was a mess. So there's actually a little more to this story, but I'm going to stop there because I've taken up enough of your time. P-Bob went to jail over this, but I actually had no idea that he did until I was in my early or mid 20s. I never rode the school bus again for the rest of my years at that school, and I rarely ever saw P-Bob in the years after high school, until he sent me a friend request on Facebook in 2017. Haha, yeah, kids, birds of a feather flock together. People like these are never your friend. Don't put yourself in the position I did because things could have been much worse. I would say let's not meet P-Bob, but he died a year or so ago. I would say I feel sympathy for him or his family, but I don't. A creepy confession. This was a short but rather ominous encounter I had while walking home from high school a couple years back. I live about 2 minutes away from the high school I went to, so I always had short uneventful walks home. Now that's not saying my neighborhood is nice by any means. We have a lot of drug users and a few robberies from time to time. But other than that I was never afraid for my life or felt threatened walking home by myself. Except for when I met the kid in the leather jacket. At the top of my hill is a house that's split in two. You know, like the ones multiple families live in. During the time of this story a family from Nepal had moved in, as was the case with most of the neighborhood at the time. One afternoon as I was walking past this house on my way home, a teenage boy about the same age as me, so around 18, stops me on the sidewalk across from the aforementioned house and just stares at me. He didn't say or do anything, just stood in front of me staring. The only thing I can recall about him was that he was Nepalese, around 5'6", and wore a black leather jacket. After about 10 dragging seconds he finally says, "I just stabbed my little brother." I responded, "Excuse me?" "Yeah, I stabbed him with a pair of scissors." He wasn't listening to my grandma. Having met my fair share of creeps, I did my best to not react in a way that would seem antagonistic or provoke him, since he really creeped me out and I was 5'4" and scrawny. "Oh man, I am sorry to hear that. That sucks," I said, trying to resist the urge to full on sprint away. "He deserved it." I told him to listen. He replied in cold monotone voice. Now I didn't believe a word he said. I chalked it up to some weird ducked up humor he had. All I could think to reply was, "That sucks." After another awkward silence he asks me, "Where do you go to school?" Not wanting to answer this creepy kid, I turned the question on him and asked where he went to school. He said, "I don't go to school." "Do you go there?" He pointed in the direction of my high school. No, I take the bus to, and I named one of the other schools in my city. The look on his face made it clear to me that he didn't believe me. Knowing that I should probably get away from this dude while I still could, I said something along the lines of, sorry, I have to get home to help my dad. See ya. The whole time I walked down to the intersection that led to my street, he stared at me, and then like nothing happened he turned around, proceeding to walk back up the hill. As soon as I got home I wanted to write the whole thing off, because who really just goes up to a random person saying they stabbed someone, I thought to myself. Although I didn't think what the guy said was real, I told my mom to just in case. She said don't worry about it. I am sure he was just some weirdo. I'll drive past the house and see if anything's going on. Around 5 minutes later she comes back with a shocked look on her face. There's an ambulance in front of the corner house. They had someone on a stretcher putting them into the ambulance while an older Nepalese woman was crying. They also had someone in the back of a cop car. I asked her to describe the guy, but she said she didn't stop long enough to see. I was lost for words. Had I actually been the recipient of a guilty confession? I never saw the kid in the leather jacket again. About a week later I walked past the same house and it was empty with no one living in it. Looking back on this I realized I should have gotten my statement taken or called in or something. But my parents had bad run-ins with the police in the past, so they didn't want me getting involved, and I won't lie, I was scared shitless. To this day I wonder if what the kid had told me was true. Had he actually stabbed his brother and told the first person he saw on the street? Whoa, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content. It's free and that's a great price.